So, hey, everybody, I wanted to welcome you to our interview series for the Child-Centered Divorce Journey. This is Dr. Erica Ellis, and today I'm thrilled to have Peter Fabish with us. Peter is an attorney in Boulder, Colorado. He's the co-founder of the Conscious Family Law and Mediation Center, and he is also the author of a best-selling book called Collaborative Divorce Advantage. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Yeah, it's awesome. So Peter's going to be talking to us today about how a conscious law process can be a transformative experience for divorcing families. And this may be something that people aren't familiar with. And I thought it was something really unique and special, which is why I really wanted to have this opportunity to talk to Peter. So, you and I share the belief that resolving a divorce outside of court is in the best interest of everybody involved, the adults and the children. And at your practice, you've created, again, this rather unique approach. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that and how it works and how you utilize it with your clients.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to first say how much I appreciate the work that you're doing, Dr. Ellis, and it really fits in very much with what we thinking about or being motivated by in terms of creating this process. And yeah, it's there's been is the traditional way of doing divorce, of course, was just for both parties to get their own lawyers and to fight it out, and often end up in court and have a judge, like to say a stranger in a robe, decide how they should divide their assets, how they should support each other financially, and how their children should be parented. And This clearly left just a lot to be desired as an appropriate way for families to transition from marriage to co-parenting. And so in the 80s, I believe it was that it first started appearing, maybe that was the 90s, a new form of collaborative divorce, which a lot of people may be familiar with. It actually goes by the name collaborative divorce. It involves quite a number of professionals getting together with the families and helping them to go through a divorce in a collaborative fashion without having to go to court. And I could say a little bit more about that, but only with the reason to answer your question, which is to sort of distinguish how we do things. Here, we also promote collaborative divorces. It's just a little different from that process that was developed, that sort of capital C collaborative divorce process that was developed a couple decades ago. And in our process, we have attorney mediators. So all of our mediators are family law attorneys, and the reason we consider that important is that because the mediator is a neutral, so the mediator is not representing either party. The mediator is helping the parties come to agreement as a neutral, but also really helping the parties to understand the divorce process and to understand the law around divorce. And so, although the attorney is, as a neutral, cannot advise either party, and it's not possible, by the way, to represent both parties either. Certainly not in Colorado.
Sure.
It's considered an unwaivable conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we can give a lot of information to the parties to help them to understand their rights, to understand the lay of the land and what the process is like. And so we take parties through the process from step one to the filing of their settlement agreement. So we help them do all their financial disclosures. We create a spreadsheet that's got all their assets and debts. We have mediation sessions in which we talk to them about how to divide their assets, about how to come to an agreement on spousal support, the two forms being maintenance, or in some states it's called alimony. Here in Colorado, it's called maintenance, which is just spousal support directly from one spouse to the other, and child support, which is meant to support the raising of the children. And finally, a parenting plan, which has the main aspects of how they're going to co-parent, which include decision making and parenting schedule, and other details like vacation schedules and things like that, and how they're going to divide other expenses. So we take them all the way through their disclosures, through getting to their agreements, and then we draft up very detailed agreements for them. We go back and forth with them to get all the details right. And in the end, they walk away with a full packet of pleadings that they can just file in the court and typically have either no or only one hearing in which the court has them come in, and it's called a non-contested hearing. Goes through the agreement with them, and they're finished.
Okay. So in what way do you see that as transformative for the families? Because I think that's sort of the powerful statement that comes from this process. So in what way do you see it transforming families?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Erica, because it is a really important one to me. It's so let me just start with this. I I'm a believer that growth typically doesn't happen when people are in their comfort zones, at least not as rapidly or profoundly. Um, Usually, when we're comfortable and everything's going well, we're too busy doing other things to be worrying too much about growing and learning and becoming better people. Although people, many people will do that all the time, but when I've noticed, and I think many have noticed, some of the greatest growth is possible is when people are going through a difficult time, and they're out of their comfort zone. And as many of us know, divorce. I've also been through divorce. I'm currently in a marriage, but I've been through my own divorce. Is a time that you are almost certainly going to be out of your comfort zone. It is. It can be very anxiety provoking, even terrifying for many people, um, and it just shakes up everything. It shakes up the foundation of a lot of identity, finances, parenting, everything. And so some people can see this as an opportunity to say, well, what got me to this point? First of all, how did I end up with this particular partner? How did our marriage break down? And where can I do anything about that? And typically, what we try to help people to see is the effort to get the other person to change in order to have things go differently is
Futile.
road
Yes.
developed.
Futile at best.
Yes, thank you for making the words. And so the what the real opportunity is to look at oneself for each person and say, well, what brought me to this point, and what can I do differently going forward in order to have a better life, in order to be able to co-parent well with this person that I'm divorcing, and in order to even set myself up in some future time and being in another intimate relationship that will hopefully turn out differently and be much better and richer, which has certainly, by the way, been my experience.
Yep.
My current marriage has been going on for 10 years, and it's incredible in terms of just I say incredible because it's incredible to me. I did not think a marriage could be this good because of where I was before. I had a lot of learning and growing up to do.
Sure.
From
Well,
marriage.
it's also nice for people to hear that there's a happy future ahead of them, because I think in the midst of it, it always feels pretty dim and dreadful, and that nothing will ever get better. And I hope people hear you saying too that, if you go through that crisis as a growth opportunity, you could be in your next relationship in a healthier way than you were in the last one. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the only reason you have to have for doing it, honestly. Many people are motivated first and foremost by their children. They want what's best for their kids, and they want to do things in a way that's going to be the least harmful and the most healthy for their children. And so that's a big motivator for a lot of people. Some people might try to sort of get to a lofty height and say, well, I'm going to do it just to be a better person and to, be, better to my spouse. That's great. But, I also would just caution people not to what I would call spiritually bypass, like try to jump too far ahead too quickly. Be with where you are now, work it through, but also just know that these ways of going about things can actually just create a much better life experience for people. And I say that purely from personal experience, by the way.
Sure.
I don't say this as something I read in a book.
You've lived it. Yeah.
I've lived it. I've
Yep.
lived it, and I've seen it in others.
Sure. Yep. Okay. So clearly hearing you talk about this, it's so different than going to court, but it would be useful to hear from your perspective how this process is so different from a litigated process.
Yeah. Well, it could hardly be more different. In a litigated process, as I mentioned earlier, the two sides will typically each hire their own lawyer. A number of people go through a divorce without lawyers at all. They go pro se, but they're still litigating. They're still fighting. But let's just start with the each party hires a lawyer. In that case, the lawyers are largely running the show. The lawyers are handling the strategy, what types of information to go after, what you call discovery, what issues to make a big deal out of, and often, frankly, I'll just have to say, lawyers come in a lot of different colors. Some lawyers I think are very oriented towards doing what I think is the ethical and right thing to do, which is to come in and actually be a problem solver and to try to help people get through their divorce in an appropriate way. But many lawyers, and then at the far end of the other end of the spectrum are lawyers that are just simply, in my view, unethical. They're really just looking to make as much money as they can off of each case. And best way to make a lot of money off a litigated case is to get as much fighting to happen as you can.
Right. You drag it out in court, the lawyers make a lot of money.
That's right. And then in the middle somewhere, where a lot of lawyers fall, I think, are other types of lawyers that are simply following their training. And our training is to be an advocate. So the lawyer will come in and say, well, what's the best thing I can do for my client? Well, I can get them the most money in maintenance or having to pay the least. I can get them the most property. I can get them the most parenting time. I can get them the most decision making, and just going to war over all these issues when, in fact, there really is no need to go to war over all the issues. And in fact, the parents, with a little help, would be fully capable of working these things out in a way that actually works for them. And the difficulty there is parents come into divorce very understandably on emotional tilt. It's a very scary experience. And as you know, when someone's on emotional tilt, a lot of your higher functioning parts of your brain can go offline, and people start operating off of the more primitive parts of their brain. And it's really hard to make decisions. It's hard to make forward-looking and thinking decisions. And when a lawyer comes in, the other type of lawyer that'll also stir this up a lot are the ones that get really enrolled and entangled in their client's emotional issues and become sort of like yeah, you're right. All that person is really such a jerk, and we need to just take them down.
Right. It fuels any animosity that they're already coming into the process with. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so again, and those lawyers, I think, oftentimes will think they're doing what's best for their client. They think they're the knight in shining armor, but they're not, in our view, being a mature, integrous counselor. And by that I mean someone who, yes, is willing to fight about things that are important, that have to be fought over and that are important, but first and foremost is looking for, how can I give grounded advice, how can I be the one who's emotionally grounded here when my client can't be, is really having trouble being emotionally grounded.
Right.
How can I be a sage counselor to my client when my client is struggling with fear and anger and resentment? And so that's what I think a good lawyer will do, but many lawyers aren't so good at that. And so the two parties, I got a little astray there, but the two parties will lawyer up. The lawyers will handle most of the preparation for trial and discovery. And then the lawyers will largely handle the negotiations. Now, these are all client driven. Clients do ultimately get to make the final decisions, not so much on strategy. Actually, just in case many people don't realize, the lawyers actually do have the ethical right to decide strategy in a litigation. They'll listen to their clients, but they get the final say on that. In terms of settlements, the clients have the final say. Um, but then, after going through an enormous amount of expense, and often even before trial, a ton of hard feelings, because there's been all these back and forths between the lawyers, and the clients read these things, and
Mhm.
each time they read them, they get more upset and more hurt. If the case does not settle, it will go to trial. And the trials are, I've seen enough of them to know, and many of my lawyer colleagues have as well. They are so damaging to families. There's really almost no way you can go through a divorce trial without it being pretty damaging.
Yeah.
You can't unsay the things that get said in court. You can't undo the cross examinations that happen by the lawyers, where they're trying to press the other party, sometimes embarrass them, and it's pretty awful. And so it's hard to walk away from that process as a functioning co-parenting unit.
Yeah, I was just going to add that to me is one of the biggest casualties, is that they were already struggling to effectively co-parent. And once you go through that kind of litigious process, it is so damaging to that relationship, and it makes it even more challenging. So,
It is. It is. I can say that from again from experience. I really, and like you, Dr. Ellis, I'm really am driven by. I have some pretty personal reasons for doing what I do. I was not a child of divorce, but my mother, when I was 11, committed suicide, and it broke up our family in many ways. Her family blamed my father and cut us off, and we were very close to them. It was very similar to going through, in some ways, to going through a really horrible divorce where one
mm,
parent disappears from the children's life, and
mhm.
and I experienced firsthand the damage that can cause. And so, I'm driven in large part to do this work, and John and I, my partner John Hawley and I came up with this process in large part because we couldn't stomach seeing families go through the traditional process and what it was doing to them. And so, when I say all of this, it's not, I am motivated purely, quite honestly, by a desire to see families do better. Um, and, uh, and that's what we're driven by here.
Yeah. Well, we share that passion for sure. And a lot of my passion is trying to protect the children from the emotional damage that divorce can cause. And clearly staying out of court is one way of doing that. I mean, from what you've seen, what do you think some of the greatest mistakes that the parents make going through the divorce process that have the greatest potential to damage their kids?
Yeah, good question. In terms of the damage to the children, I think the biggest mistake I see parents make is allowing their what's gotten to them to the point of the divorce, where the breakdown of the relationship and the various things sour them against the other parent's ability to be able to co-parent. Now, there are certainly cases, and there's many, where one of the parents has challenges in being a good parent, and that realistically occurs, and sometimes the challenges are quite serious. But in most cases, both parents want to and are capable of parenting reasonably well. And the research is, I'm sure you're aware, is quite clear that children do much better in almost all cases if they maintain a strong relationship with both parents post divorce. And so what I sometimes see parents doing is having their emotional reaction to the divorce affects how they view how the parenting decisions should be made, and the parenting agreement should go. And so in those cases, I do just urge parents, yes, talk to us about what your concerns are. Clearly, you want to benefit your children in the best way possible. But really be thinking about that with the context in mind that however However, we can best preserve the relationship with both parents and the children is almost always going to be in the best interest of the children. Um, in cases where there's actual abuse or serious substance abuse and things like that, absolutely we need to take precautions there. And
Sure.
sometimes
But
relationships.
I do agree with you that I think there are so many parents that believe they don't have the potential to co-parent, when in fact, if they could just figure out how to rise above all of their own emotions, there's a way to do it.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Good way of saying it.
you know,
Yeah. And certainly a big problem when it happens is when parents are unable to effectively keep themselves from basically communicating to the children that they think the other parent is a bad person in some way. It's incredibly hard on the kids when that happens, because the
mhm.
kids are they don't as far as they're concerned, they need both parents, and they need both parents to survive. And to put a child in the position of having to decide who's right and who's wrong, who's good and who's bad, there's a lot of research on this, and intuitively it seems obvious it's not good for the children.
Yeah,
And,
no, it's an absolutely impossible choice because it's a no-win for the
yeah.
kids. And to segue to the next question, are there other broad stroke things that you could say to parents in terms of what other things are they able to do to protect their children from the emotional, the legal, the financial fallout from a divorce?
Mhm. Well, yeah, it starts with doing one's own work and taking care of oneself. So as soon as parents can get to the point where their primary focus is on how can I best be here and how can I best grow into, grow and mature. And by the way, I believe the maturation process occurs for human beings throughout the lifespan, never stops. I keep
I
growing up.
agree.
And I'm much more grown up than I was 10 years ago. And I'm 56.
Yep.
So it doesn't stop, I don't believe. And so at least it doesn't have to stop, and it's good if it doesn't. And so and get off the focus of blame and anger toward the other parent. Now, I'm not telling people to stuff your anger, to stuff your grief, to stuff your pain. Those things are real and they have to be processed. And I don't. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is this sort of exclusive focus on the other person is so bad, and I'm so angry that I've got to get them, and I've got to prove that I'm right about all these things. Um, and just the focus being on the children. How can I be grounded? How can I be um,
Yeah.
and 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 uh, and it also includes um, being able to have good conversations with your kids, clear conversations about what's happening and how you are feeling. One thing I learned early on from some really good psychologists was who work with kids a lot is that if you have a certain set of emotions going on and you tell your children that you're feeling a different way, they may believe you consciously, but they will experience something called cognitive dissonance, because they get on some level that you're not really fully telling the truth.
Right.
So if you're feeling a ton of grief and you're like, oh, everything's fine,
Right.
it actually produces a lot of anxiety for children because they don't know what to make of it. They don't consciously know why, but they're just anxious.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
being able to reveal to your children in a safe and mature way, no, I'm pretty sad because of what's going on, but I'm also right here for you, and we're going to work things out.
Yeah. No, I think parents are an incredible model for their kids about how to manage their emotions. So I think they could say one thing, but what they do is really more powerful. And
Absolutely, yeah,
you know,
I agree with that.
kids are so intuitive. It's hard to fool them. So
Yeah.
Well,
Awesome.
Peter, clearly you and I share a lot of the same passion, and I love what you're doing. And I think you bring something wonderful to the field. And I hope people who are looking for or a less contentious process, and one that's focused on protecting their emotional well-being and their kids' emotional well-being, check you guys out, because I think you're doing some really wonderful work.
Mm. Thank you so much, Dr. Ellis. I really appreciate that. I appreciate getting to have this conversation with you. And I also, as I mentioned earlier, really appreciate the work you're doing. I'm familiar with it. I've looked at your website as well. Um, it's great work, and it's needed work. So
Well,
please
thank you
keep it
so
up.
much. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that are interested in what you guys are offering. So good luck with everything going forward. We'll continue to work together doing this work to try to protect everybody from the damage that all this ugliness can potentially cause. So
Yes, it's good work.
thanks. You too, Peter.
All
Thank you
right.
so much.
Mhm.